Okay, it's time once again to talk about TIFF 2015. Saw four animated movies that were there. Only one I didn't see was Iron Giant because it's getting a wide re-release, so it's not really a point to seeing that one. Um, yeah, so these are the films that I saw at TIFF 2015, and let's start things off with the first one. The first movie I saw at TIFF 2015 was The Phantom Boy. This is by the creative minds who brought us A Cat in Paris, which was Academy Award nominated for Best Animated Feature a couple of years back, I think 2011, something like that. Um, and this is the story of there's young boy, undergoing chemo in the hospital, and he discovers that he can kind of astral project himself. He can have an out of body experience and kind of go flying out through around the city. And his job in the hospital ends up being he'll wander out and see other people in the hospital whose spirits are starting to kind of wander around, not know where they are, usually after a traumatic accident or something like that, and he'll guide them back to their bodies. And it's not clear if he's kind of staving away death or anything like that. It's just it's kind of makes it look like being able to astral project is a quirk of nature, and you remember it as a dream, but the boy kind of retains the knowledge. And a cop gets shot by a master criminal who is who threatens the city. He creates a computer virus that wipes out all the electricity, and then he demands money, or he's going to do something really, really, really bad instead of just inconveniencing people with the lights. So he gets shot by that bad guy, this cop, and the boy, he's a big fan of cops, and he finds this cop, and he ushers him back to his body, and then he finds him later in the hospital, and the cop remembers. Most of the people don't remember, but the cop remembers the boy as if it was a dream, and the boy basically starts doing police work for the cop because he can astral project himself at will. So the cop is kind of in the hospital. He can't really do anything to get the main bad guy, but the boy will float around and he'll see people and he'll listen to them talking, and he can hear everything that's going on in the location where he's astral projecting, where his body is, and his mouth can still move when he's astral projecting. So he'll be sitting there with his eyes closed, but he'll still be talking. He can still be speaking. So he communicates with the cop that way. um, and that is basically the setup for the story. It's basically about the relationship between the cop and this boy, and basically about how the boy helps the cop get the big bad guy. This movie, unlike A Cat in Paris, which it had mob elements, these creatives seem to be focused on American mob stories. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because it's fun. But unlike in A Cat in Paris, where the mob elements would be really dark and they wouldn't jive with what you were seeing on screen. Like, I think the main mob boss in that one killed the girl's parents or father or something like that. And then you see them running around screen. They're bumbling and they're trying to catch a cat. And I remember them falling in a river or something like that. And yeah, where it was just like, oh, he's like a bumbling silly villain, but he's actually a murderer. This walks that balance a lot better. You didn't have that stark contrast between, subject matter and goofy cartoon antics. There are goofy cartoon antics in this, but there are also some tense situations. The main bad guy, he's got those goofy elements. He has basically a Picasso face, and he keeps saying, "I'm going to tell you the horrible story of what happened to my face and how it got disfigured." And he always gets cut off, and they never actually reveal what happened to his face. It's a fun little running gag. And there's a little comic relief dog who keeps getting smacked around and abused, and the animators seem to delight in that, and the audience did too. But no, there's genuine moments of tension. There's a moment where the mob boss corners there's there's a love interest for the cop, and she's a reporter, and she's cornered in a parking garage by the main bad guy, and the boy is flying around, and he's telling the cop what's happening, and the cop's making phone calls, and they're putting and they put the main bad guy on the phone, and he's like, okay, we're the police, we have you surrounded, and trying to like bluff them out and stuff like that. So there are these tense scenes, and there are again, the way they actually use the astral projection is really, really neat in two ways. First, in the actual police work, the fact that he's able to fly into places, and the cop will call somebody up, and the boy will like see something going on and be like, no, he's lying, and then the cop will be like, I know you're lying, and pressure them. And then things with the parking garage scene where they basically bluff having them surrounded by the police, and then there are moments where they start to get suspicious and stuff like that. So for example, one guy, he's like, raise your hands, and one guy starts scratching his head, and then the boy tells the cop what's going on. Then the cop on the phone says, no, I didn't say scratch your head, I said raise your hands. And so they start to believe there are actually people there and stuff like that. So the way they integrated the astral projection into the police work was really neat. It was really cool. It was fun to see them actually take the astral projection and use it as a plot point. It was an integral part of the plot because the cop couldn't go out and do anything. He was shot. He was confined to a wheelchair. So to actually use that to move the plot along and to actually develop this relationship between the cop and the boy was really cool. And another cool thing about it was just kind of the wish fulfillment fantasy side of things. It was fun to see the boy fly around New York City, and you see even in the poster he's like perching on top of the torch of the Statue of Liberty, and he's just flying around New York, flying around these buildings. The animator said at one point, or the director said, that it was fun to set the movie in New York because you can fly around the buildings in Central Park and stuff like that. And they set the movie in autumn, so you get all those autumn colors. And it was really neat. It's really pretty. It has that kind of painterly, kind of a kid's picture book feel to it, where it's been like painted or pasteled or something like that, and you have those sketchy kind of wobbly lines that look really nice. And it's very, you see the style of this animation, and you see the drawings and the line quality and the way everything is colored, and you can tell it's by the same guys who made Cat in Paris. It's a very distinctive style. But they do some really cool things with it. I like how the boy, he doesn't just kind of float up out of his body. His spirit is kind of wobbly. He kind of stretches and warps and contorts, and like really nice kind of squash and stretch going on. He's really, really fluid when he's in astral projection form. And again, just they did some cool creative things with that. It's a cool idea to begin with. It marries with the kind of cop drama really well. I kind of wondered if this would be suitable for kids, just because cop drama, kids, I don't really know, but I think it's presented in a fun enough way. Certainly, you have your main character's a little boy, and the Picasso face villain, he's kind of fun. He's got some bumbling henchmen, so I guess you can get the kids into that way. But it does seem like it works for families. Like the relationship between the cop and the boy is very nice and genuine, and even the cop and his love interest, they have a really fun relationship. She's not really a throwaway character like she would be in other movies. She's investigating what's going on, and she's part of the driving force of the story. A lot of the story revolves around her because she, the cop and the boy can't leave the hospital. She can. She goes and does stuff, and they try to help her out while she's investigating to keep her safe, but also to help get to the truth. So yeah, it's a really nice movie, really well done. Still, it has that hard-hitting stuff. The boy is a cancer patient. They keep talking about him being terminal. The threats from the villain are severe. Like, he points guns at people's heads, and like he has his goons come to beat people up, but one of the heroes is shot in the first 10 minutes of the movie, so he presents a real threat. But again, it's balanced nicely, and I do think this is a movie that families could see. Was really glad I saw it. It was one of the better films for sure that I saw at TIFF this year. And much better than Cat in Paris too, in my opinion. It marries its subject matter and the way it's handled a lot better than that film did. The elements didn't seem so disparate, the dark elements and the light elements. And it's a funny movie too. You know, a lot of the jokes are quite funny. The audience was giggling throughout. So yeah, The Phantom Boy, wholeheartedly recommend it. The next film I saw at TIFF 2015 was The Boy and the Beast. The Boy and the Beast. It's an animated film by the director of Summer Wars and a whole host of things. And it's basically a young boy. I think he's about 10 years old. His mother dies and his parents are divorced, so he doesn't know where his father is. He's kind of not around, and he's going to stay with some relatives he doesn't know, but he's really upset about everything, so he runs away. And while just running through the streets of Tokyo, he runs into this giant anthropomorphic bear in a trench coat, not fooling anybody, who basically says, "Hey, do you want to come with me?" And the boy follows him, and he finds this underground animal city kind of thing. It's not really underground. There's a sky and everything, but he runs through a couple back alleys, and he sees a horse. The horse walks through this portal and becomes an anthropomorphic horseman. And then he finds this city. And in this city, there's the current leader, who's this little rabbit, this little Fu Manchu bearded rabbit guy, is retiring. He's ascending to another plane to become a high god. And so he's not going to be the leader of the city anymore, but it's going to come down to a contest between a kind of wise, refined, diplomatic, only using violence as a last resort kind of boar character who's well liked by the people in the city, and this brash, abrasive bear who is who is a slob and who is ill-mannered and who has a violent temper, and he's kind of an outsider, kind of a loner, and he is also in contention to be the leader of the city, and it's going to come down to a giant arena style fight where they're transforming into giant creatures, and they're hitting each other and punching each other, and we get a taste of that early on where they just kind of scrap in the street. They just, insults are thrown back and forth, and the boar is kind of like, no, it's fine, I'm not going to give in to you, and then the bear kind of goads him on, and then he gets his he gets it handed to him, basically. But so these two guys are in contention for the leadership of the city, but the boar needs to have an apprentice in order to be considered valid, and none of the animal people in the city want to have anything to do with him. He's an outsider, he's a loner, he has two friends who are this pig monk and this baboon who just kind of hang around and like are just kind of his friends, like a little bit out of sympathy. So he finds this boy, and he's like, okay, if I can't get an animal to be my apprentice, I'll get a boy to be my apprentice. And there's some contention about that, but the rabbit approves it. But it's basically him training the boy, and then of course the boy teaches him as well. And that's the basic premise for the movie. A few things about this. Someone at the studio really liked, well, first, technically, it looks great. It's awesome. It's primarily 2D, and the characters all move really, really nicely. Somebody at the studio really had a thing for crowd scenes. There's so many crowd scenes in this. They all look pretty good, though, especially in Tokyo with the people walking. Just these throngs and throngs of people walking. It all looks really good. The CG elements are nice. There's this, like, kind of particle effects whale, and there's an opening montage where it talks about the history of the contest for the leadership, and that's all done with these kind of flame avatars of the main characters who you meet later on, and then you see what they look like. It looks great. It looks great. The 2D animation is great. The one issue I kind of have with the look of the film is the animal world. Apart from the fact that they're anthropomorphic animals, there's nothing really fantastic about it. It kind of just looks like, a kind of rural Japanese village. There's some winding streets and stuff like that, but it basically looks pretty normal. You know, it doesn't look like anything out of the ordinary. And this isn't helped by the fact that the anthropomorphic animal characters, they kind of just look, they pretty much move like people all the time. Like, you don't see, like, there's this scene in a market, and I wanted to see, like, a monkey haggling with someone and then getting frustrated and then just climbing away or something like that. Or I wanted to see, like, children playing in the street, and one of the children is like, "Race ya," and then they get down on all fours. Something like that. They basically are people. Except in aesthetic, except in look. They look like people, except for their faces most of the time. They move like people. So this world isn't really fantastic. It's not like you're stepping through the wardrobe into Narnia, where it's just, you know, there's talking lions, and and there's fawns and centaurs and stuff like that, and just really out of the ordinary. Except for the fact that these people all have animal faces, it's kind of ordinary. So there was that. But that's just an aesthetic qualm. My biggest problem is, basically, usually the way the narrative of how these things work is, you know, when you're dealing with kind of a magical world scenario, the kid in question has a problem in the real world. They go on this fantastic adventure, and they come back to the real world, and they've learned something. They've grown as a character, as a person. They've learned a little something about themselves, and then they can kind of deal with their problem in the real world a little bit better. Another anime film, Spirited Away, has that simple narrative structure, and it works fine. This one does things a little different. So the boy stays in this other world for like 7 years. I think he grows up and he's 17, and he's been with this bear, and then he travels back to the real world, and this is kind of where the movie stops dead. He travels back to the real world, and he stays there for a long time. He meets this girl, and then he starts learning how to read. He starts trying to read Moby Dick, and she's teaching him how to read. And they go into detail about him getting his college certification so that he can go to college. And then, he's trying to reconnect with his father. And this goes on for a while. Meanwhile, in the animal kingdom, everybody's gearing up for this big fight between the bear and the boar that we've heard hyped up the whole time, and it's just put on hold. It's just stopped dead in its tracks. Eventually the boy does go back, and then we get to the big fight, and that's all fun. But then there's, basically you start off by, he's in the real world, he goes to the animal world, and you think, okay, this is where our adventure is. But then he goes back to the real world, and things just stop dead. It's not as fun. It's not as interesting. The characters he meets in the real world aren't as, they're not as fun or as interesting as any of the animal characters, or as well developed. The girl is boring. The dad is not interesting. And so that's a problem. When it does go back to the animal world, it's fun, but then they kind of throw in this weird subplot that doesn't make a lot of sense. They say things like, there's this kind of running theme that a person who grows up in the animal world, a human being, is not whole because they're kind of separated from their kind and they don't really know who they are. So there's kind of references, and like they talk about that. And what happens is, okay, spoilers, but whatever. So the bear wins against the boar. And the boar has 2 sons. One is a boar, and one is a boy, a human boy, wearing basically a boar hat. It looks like a pig hat. And apparently this fools everybody in the animal city. Nobody realizes he's a human. But because he has this problem where he feels separated and he doesn't feel like anybody in the animal world, he kind of turns evil, and then he kills the bear right after the bear becomes the leader. Or I think he shoots him or something, or like shoots a bolt of something at him, and he's knocked out for a bit. He comes back, but he's knocked out for a bit. But it was an attempt to kill him, basically. And this kind of catapults us into where this boy, the boar boy, goes to the real world, and then the main character, the protagonist, goes to the real world, and they have a giant kind of fight. Kind of thing, and there's a giant particle whale because the Boar Boy sees the book Moby Dick and then transforms into a whale. But that's kind of the thing. It's really loose. When you see this boy in the animal world, it's not like he's being ostracized or picked on or anything like that. He's basically accepted. He's the son of this boar. The boar took him in, like, as a human. He was abandoned, so he took him in, raised him as his own son, and he's very well respected, and he's very diplomatic, and he always treated the boy nice, and it's not like there was anything fueling this villain. He's there throughout the movie, but his motivations kind of come out of nowhere. They're not well established, and that's the problem with a lot of this movie, is just, it's the interesting stuff kind of gets shoved off to the side. There's a moment where the bear is basically... There are moments where the bear character, who's the funnest character in this movie, again, he's big and he's brash and he's loud and he swears on occasion and he's messy and he's very haphazard, but they make a point of, he kind of grew up on his own, like the little protagonist. So, he's had to learn how to do things for himself the rough way. He's kind of had to rough it through life, so he kind of has that thick skin. But he's a really fun character, and every time this movie stops and, throws in kind of a hackneyed villain, or he goes back to the real world and tries to reconnect with his dad and just, whatever, every time this bear is out of the movie, it just suffers for it. The best part about The Boy and the Beast is the relationship between the boy and the beast. They're a lot of fun together, because the boy is a hothead too, right? He talks back to the bear, and the bear chases him around the dinner table and tries to fight him, but he's dodging him, and the way they actually learn from each other is cool too. The bear is not really good at communicating how to fight, and the boy wants to toughen up and be a warrior like the bear, so the boy just kind of observes the bear and then kind of mimics his movements and learns how to fight that way, and they kind of help each other, and they have a really nice relationship, but every time it's sidelined by one of these other silly subplots, the movie just suffers for it. It could have been a really fun, simple story, but they complicated it with the other elements. The boy basically should have stayed in the real world the whole time. If they wanted to do stuff with the human boar son villain angle, they should have developed that character more. He maybe has 5 lines in the whole movie, which isn't a lot to base your main villain on. I think there was just more stuff they could have done with it. They could have made the world more fantastical. They could have made the animals more animalistic. See a bird perched on a roof or something like that, even though it's kind of like a person. Just fun stuff like that. Make their houses reflective of that. Maybe the birds live in houses like us, but they're on stilts or something like that. There's things they could have done, better. Design-wise, but especially story-wise, because the story just hits these brick walls, and, by the end of the movie, you just want the climax to resolve so that it can be over, pretty much. So that's the Boy and the Beast. All that said, I still would recommend this movie. It's very flawed. It is very, very flawed from a story perspective, but it does look great, even if it's not as fantastical as it could be, and the relationship between the boy and the beast is worth it for that alone. They are great characters, and even kind of some of the side characters. In the animal world, all the characters are fun. There are some characters, there are these sages they visit. You only see them on screen for a second, but they look fun too. But the pig monk, the kind of wise pig monk who's hanging around with them, and the baboon who's always making sarcastic remarks, they're fun. The bear is fantastic. I love this bear. His relationship with the boy is great. And there's this kind of, the current leader is this bunny who keeps reappearing and disappearing, and they'll be talking to him, and then he'll appear behind them, and he's this tiny little bunny, but he's got this weird mystical power about him, and he's really calm and zen. He's a lot of fun too. So for all those characters, it's definitely worth it. It's definitely worth it for the relationship between the boy and the beast. Despite all its flaws, it's still worth checking out, and the animation is great. Okay, the next film I saw was called 25 April, which was about the Gallipoli War campaign, as told mostly from the ANZAC, the Australian New Zealand Army Corps. who are stationed there. And this is a documentary by Leanne Pooley, who's a festival favorite. Her previous documentary, The Top Twins, was successful, and she's done other films as well. But this film is a documentary about the Gallipoli War campaign, and what makes it interesting is it's basically constructed from war diaries, and it's being retold through reenactments and interviews with actors, but it's all CGI. It's all done in kind of a cel-shaded kind of aesthetic. Yeah, that's the basic premise of the of the film. It follows, I think, about 6 different people. You have a general, I think 3 soldiers, an army nurse. Maybe there was more than that, but you follow this kind of group of characters, and their different experiences dealing with the Gallipoli War campaign on the side of the Anzac, and yeah, it's really interesting. Just kind of that premise that from the get-go is you really want to kind of see that, because an animated documentary. It's not that there haven't been any. There was one about, I think, Palestinian cows a couple of years back at TIFF. That was done through stop-mo. The reenactments were done through stop-mo claymation. It almost looked like Shaun the Sheep or something like that. I didn't catch that one, but, animated reenactments are nothing new. But the interviews were also done animated. This is a completely animated documentary. And it does fall under that category of documentary because, again, even though it's kind of staged, it's all from war diaries. So the words you are hearing are all pieces of history, essentially. Yeah, so this movie, it's not a long movie. I think it's about 80 minutes long, and it kind of felt like it could be a little bit longer. Like, there could be a little bit more to it. There were some, even the director mentioned there were some kind of historic battles that they didn't get to during this campaign, that they just kind of, didn't have time for or whatever, which is kind of more understandable with, an animated feature, especially one that's being subsidized by the New Zealand Film Commission and stuff like this. You don't expect it to be that long, and at the end of the day, if you finish the documentary wanting more, that's a good thing. Aesthetically, you can imagine it looks pretty good. I did notice a few just kind of technical hiccups, like occasionally, like, the best example I could give to this movie would be, for a point of comparison, was if Telltale Games just went full on and made a movie, this is the kind of movie they would make. It looks exactly like the same aesthetic as Telltale Games, just, it's cel-shaded, and like different shadows will have that kind of effect as well. It has that kind of cartoony quality, and then of course, you have the thick lines to give it a kind of a comic book feel. But which are all positives, but then you get to kind of the quality issues with a Telltale game running on that engine. And, just little things like you would see in a video game kind of crop up in this movie. Occasionally, like somebody's going to grab a rope or something like that, and their hand will kind of be wobbling, like not in place, like the IK looks off and stuff like that. There are quite a few little technical glitches in this thing, where you'll just look at something and kind of be like, what? This may be just more me, just kind of, knowing a little bit more about that stuff. I'm not sure the average audience member would, but there are times when it's distracting. There is a limited use of 2D animation, and it's for stuff they generally didn't make models for. I probably should talk about this aesthetically. There's kind of 3 discordant pieces which kind of clash. There's the interview segments, there's the regular animation, and there's the 2D 2D animation. Sometimes the 2D animation is fine. It's incorporated into sections where they didn't want to make and texture and rig the model for that, so 2D was a simpler option where it works fine. There's a little dog, I can't remember the dog's name. Occasionally there's crows flying around. They're all 2D. It looks fine. It's integrated fine. It works well with the subject matter. It makes sense that they would use 2D there. But then there's some really weird moments. There's a moment where all the Anzac guys are gathering around and they're doing a haka, the traditional Maori kind of chant, which is done before rugby games and stuff like that as well. And there's a moment where you see all the main characters, all of their guys get up and they start moving their mouths and singing the haka, but then you see just these still images of people in the background going like, you know what I mean? Like where it's 2D background figures who aren't moving. And it really doesn't mesh with the 3D figures. It looks cheap for one, and it kind of clashes. Like, the character models are such too that I think with, a little bit of, just tweaking here or there, you could have had, just a few other figures in the background, like maybe blur it, put some motion blur on it or something, so it's a little out of focus in the background, and then, or even just do that with 2D and have a little bit of movement, but things like that really don't mesh well. And then there are some times too where you'll see a 3D figure in the foreground, and in the background there's a 2D figure. Occasionally that will mesh too, not as much, but I mean something like that in this movie was really glaring, where you have all these, imagine just in any movie seeing a whole bunch of people standing, your main character standing singing, and then everybody else behind them just frozen. Like it takes you out of the experience, which is a problem. Another thing that's kind of discordant, we talked about the kind of telltale, kind of how it kind of looks like a computer game at some points, which I can give a little bit of a pass to. This doesn't have a huge Hollywood budget and stuff like that. But here's the thing. The interview segments, I was watching it and I was thinking to myself, the animation in these segments is amazing. Like the way the characters were moving in the interviews, the way they're just sitting, but there's so much expression, there's so much emotion that's coming out of them, and the movements are so fluid as well. And then you cut to the reenactment scenes, and the animation looks jerky, whereas I otherwise wouldn't think it would have been. And I was wondering, did they have a different studio do that? Did they have like was it just because the characters were sitting down, they had more time to actually like animate them and like refine like all the tangents and stuff like that? Like why is it so smooth here and it looks jerky here? It might have not even looked jerky here, but this animation is so smooth. It turns out all the interview segments were done using motion capture. And that raises two questions. The first being, kind of why? If you have a character sitting down or even just standing and talking, that's a lot easier to animate than someone, walking on a battlefield and things like exploding. It's like, why did you have the characters who were just sitting in a chair? Why didn't you animate them by hand? Like, it seems kind of unnecessary. I'll say this though, those interview segments really work because the emotion really transcends. They got some really good actors to do this, and just tiny little things, quivers of a lip, a little eye motion. You can see the performance of the actor coming through the animated character, and it speaks volumes, because those are actually some of the most engrossing parts of the film. These segments where these characters are being interviewed sitting down. Obviously there's kind of a suspension of disbelief with that. Some of these characters die, so they wouldn't be interviewed. It's kind of taking almost that mockumentary thing where, oh, you're filming me up again. When would you actually be filming the person in the sequence? But for a movie like this, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's all about the words of these actual people who actually lived and fought and suffered in Gallipoli. And so that's something to its credit, but it doesn't mesh well with, again, those other elements of the film. The 2D elements, especially when they're sloppy, and even just kind of the basic character animation and the reenactments, because it's not as smooth. Sometimes it's noticeably more jerky than the interview segments, where, you know, it's all mocap data, so it reads, you know, just as I would be moving it. It reads like that, but you know, it. I don't know. This is a hard one, because I did really like the story. It really put you in the mindset of it. It really just touched upon all these horrors. It touched upon, you know, going over the top, and how people would be torn to bits. It touched upon the mismanagement of the campaign and how it was essentially abandoned. It touched upon how, you know, there would be huge mismanagement. Like, they were supposed to do night raids on certain posts and take certain posts, but then it would get delayed, and then it would become daytime, and the orders were still to go forward, and of course it ended up being a shambles and stuff like that. It talked about you know, the infection and the disease, and frostbite during the winter, and it talked about uh, you know, how sometimes the guys just wanted a bath. That's all they wanted, and how they, like, crazy things, how they would go swimming in the ocean, and there would be snipers trying to pick them off while they were in the ocean, and there would occasionally be fire into the bay while they were swimming, but to a certain extent they didn't care. They just wanted to be clean. Stuff like that really came through. But I gotta say, some of the technical elements of the film did take me out of it. I don't think that's going to be the case for everybody. I think the casual viewer may give it a wide berth. Who knows, though? The kind of quality standards for film are up so high. Like, I don't really know. But yeah, to me, the elements just, like, I could see. Generally, when you make a film, you want to make it show so that all the elements fit well together. Everything is composited. You can't tell what's composited. You don't look at the sky and think, "Oh, that's a nice matte painting," unless you're, like, trying to analyze it for that detail. You can just be swept away by it. And there were a lot of little things that took me out of the movie. But overall, I really did like the movie. I like how kind of original it was. And Leanne Pooley said, you know, the Gallipoli story, it's not a new story to people in Australia and New Zealand. You know, they know it. They're grown up. It's taught in schools. So it was always the intention to make it animated. And, you know, it is really cool. It does look really nice. It does have a really nice aesthetic. There are some moments where you're with the soldiers and you're running, and they're running over the top, and, like, there's some stylized moments where it all goes red and then it all goes black and stuff like that, where it does look really good. And, you know, it is kind of fun to watch these characters, and just and again, that telltale aesthetic is a really nice aesthetic. That's why they use it in, like, all their games now, just because it works so well. It looks so good, and it looks good here too. Yeah, so again, I would recommend looking at it if you're a history buff. It's something a little different. If you're a fan of animation, it's just kind of cool to see an animation that's not kind of a straightforward narrative. It's done in a documentary structure that doesn't come along every day. That's kind of cool if you're a fan of documentary. And I do think this campaign and the stories that came out of this campaign are something really interesting. You know, the Great War is so fascinating. There are so many facets of it. You know, as a Canadian, I know about, you know, Vimy and Passchendaele and Dieppe and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, kind of hearing things from a completely different side, like on a completely different side of the world, like what was happening, what that battleground was like, and just kind of the parallels, and just kind of what a waste that bloody war was, and just how that was a constant throughout. You know, that certainly is an eye opener. So yeah, I definitely recommend this movie, 25 April. The last film I'm going to talk to you about today is a film called Zoom, and this is a co-production between Canada and Brazil. And Wow, this one is a little hard to explain. Um, so, what the movie is about, the basic narrative structure, is there is a cartoonist who's drawing this cartoon about a director, and the director is directing a film about a novelist who's writing a novel about that cartoonist from before, and it's this infinite loop of narrative structures, and all of these narrative structures kind of reflect something about the medium they're told in. So this isn't a straightforward animation. The movie about the novelist and the novel about the cartoonist are both live action, but the cartoon is rotoscoped. And see a little bit behind me. I don't know if it translates on the screen, but very flat kind of comic book colors. So, but that's not really. That's just kind of the structure of it. The story is kind of about people who are unhappy in specifically their bodies and next their lives, and it's kind of about the overemphasis on beauty and kind of. It's kind of also about the way people are perceived. So the cartoonist works at this sex doll shop. I think it said in the credits that they used Real Dolls, which is a company you can look up. Real Dolls, you can buy these kind of lifelike dolls, and kind of assumption is that people use them for sex. And she's rather flat chested, or thinks she is anyway, and wants to get breast augmentation. And she gets frustrated with the way she looks, and then, she gets the work done, and then isn't happy with it, and then she gets mad, and then in the cartoon she's drawing, the director is her dream man, right? He's this kind of sexy auteur kind of guy, and she gets frustrated with her own body, so she gives him an imperfection. She gives him a small penis. She erases the bulge in his pants, and then he starts having anxiety about that. And a part of his career is because he's an action director who wants to make an artistic film, a real film that has real meaning and real intent. So part of the way he gets that done is he kind of has to woo over this producer, and he feels he can't do that if he's sexually inadequate. The film he's directing is about a model who wants to be a writer and who runs away from her husband to go to Brazil to start writing a book, and then she has an affair with a woman, and then just is kind of discovering herself and how her life is not what she wants it to be. Her life back home is not what she wants it to be. She's kind of discovering new things about herself and new things about her novel. And that's basically it. But the interesting thing about this movie, there's a lot of movies that have kind of intertwined narrative structures. I haven't seen one quite like this, where it's got this infinite loop thing going on. The choice of kind of fixating on perception and body perception and physical attributes and stuff like that. I'm not really sure why that was picked. It's an interesting subject matter, but why for this kind of interlocking narrative? Like, it's not really a detriment to say that it's about that or anything like that, but it's like, I don't know why specifically that was picked. I have a feeling it might just be like the director or the writers or whatever, somebody was just kind of interested in that, and then somebody came up with this framework around it. So you kind of have that aspect of it, and it's really fun. They do a lot of fun stuff with it. They take it to extremes, and there's a lot of fun jokes, and there's awkward dialogue. There's some wonderful lines in this where people are just kind of talking, and so there's some really nice writing in that. But the kind of narrative structures and how they all link together is really interesting too, because every narrative structure affects the other one, which affects the next one, right? It's this infinite loop of three different narratives, which somebody is basically the author of the next narrative, and basically all of these are reflected in that. For like the most obvious one is the cartoon. You see it when you first see the cartoon come alive and the people moving around. They look like crude pencil sketches, and then you see ink comes in, and then little bits of color and flair come in, and then sometimes that even happens to reflect their emotions. Like when the guy is talking to the producer and he's wooing her a little bit, her lip color changes to a more vibrant shade of pink, and things like that. And of course you see stuff getting erased and whatever. There's a part where like water falls on the page and everybody gets kind of smeared and stuff like that. So stuff like that is really neat. In the novel section, it takes a turn from being like this narrative. They do some stuff where you can kind of see the words of the novel appearing in the scenery, and like they'll be looking out a window or something, and the kind of image behind the window will appear as like letters being written in, so the letters will all appear and then it'll all form that picture. It's a little bit hard to describe, but you just think about erasing in reverse with letters, and that's kind of the idea there. And you'll see kind of the words of the story kind of appearing here and there throughout. And another example is just kind of the structure of these things, and how they change. I mean, with the cartoon you have, stuff getting erased. With the movie, it starts out as this artistic movie, and all the colors are really washed out, and all of the shots are kind of dreamlike and stuff like that, and it's supposed to be this artsy film. But then the producer takes over the direction because they don't like the direction of it, and it becomes this like James Bond-esque thing where they're running away in helicopters, and the girl's hairstyle changes so she looks more Hollywood and stuff like that, and you see elements of that creeping in. And the novel, which starts off as just this straightforward story about this cartoonist who's unhappy with her appearance, it becomes this sting crime plot where they're trying to smuggle drugs to pay for her breast reduction surgery, and then there's like kind of like a gun shootout and stuff like that. So it's neat how one character's kind of opinions or kind of changes they're going through will affect something in the next story and the next story. All really intricate, all really nicely woven together. The movie looks great. It's really well shot. And some nice stuff. They allegedly are the first film crew to shoot in the new Ripley's Aquarium of Toronto or Ontario? The Ripley's Aquarium in Toronto, Canada. And it's kind of neat seeing Toronto play Toronto in a movie instead of it playing Chicago or New York. It's always neat when that happens, just being from here and whatever. So it was fun to see them shooting inside of Shark Lagoon, and like it was kind of a throwaway scene, but like it looked really nice. And just this was really a solid effort. It was solidly written, solidly done. The interweaving narratives are fantastic. The kind of commentary on kind of body image and our perceptions of people and how that, like, that's kind of a running theme throughout. Even the producer at one point, like, the director says to her, he's trying to, like, get the movie he made done, but he says at one point, people just look at you and they see this bitch, but I mean, they don't see that you're actually a beautiful person. Like, they can't get past the producer facade where you have to, yell at people and make sure the trains run on time kind of thing. So, like, even with minor characters, they will put that in there. And it kind of makes you wonder about some of the perception of some of the secondary characters, too. But anyway, that kind of, it's not just, I can appreciate a good story well told. I can appreciate something with interwoven storylines like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, and just how all of that connects together. There's not really anything more about a movie like Lock, Stock, but it's artistic in the way it's crafted. This is artistic in the way it's crafted, and it also kind of has something to say. And it would have been a good movie if it was just about that narrative structure. And I think I might have found that a little more interesting, because it was just kind of fun to see how stuff evolved in each plot. And you'd be watching one plot and being like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen in this one when we flip back to this one. And you're always flipping back between the three. Just it would have been done. It would have been good if for that, but they did have the intent to actually try and say something. They were trying to say something about body image and the way we're perceived and what is beautiful, and people who are unhappy in their lives because of the way they're perceived, and all that stuff is really, really cool. It's really nice that they put in that effort. And just the movie is well written, it connects together really well, and it's well made, well shot. Dialogue is good, casting is good. I don't really have bad things to say. This probably is my favorite picture of the that I saw at TIFF 2015. Yeah, just a really good movie. And again, I went to see it because of that animated component to it. I thought it was going to be a bit more than it was, but at the end of the day, I just got a good movie where some of it happened to be rotoscoped, and it fit in perfectly well. I have the least complaints with this movie. I can't really... I don't really have that many, you know. Just maybe just the what do you call it? The movie, when it's an artsy movie, it's not as interesting as the other stuff that's going on. Once it changes and becomes this like dumb Hollywood blockbuster, it gets more fun. Sadly, but kind of honestly, like the blockbuster version of that movie is more fun than the artsy version of the movie. But you know, that apart from that, you know, it's all, you know, it's a solid film. I highly recommend it. My favorite of the festival, even though it has the least amount of animation. Yeah, Zoom, simply titled Zoom. Great movie, not to be confused with the Tim Allen flick about a superhero school, which I haven't seen, so it might be good. So I'm not gonna knock that one. I haven't seen it, but this is another movie called Zoom. Definitely go check it out. And that was my TIFF 2014. Again, I did the same thing I always do as of late. Just try to see all the animated features I can. There's a few reasons why I do that. The primary one is budgetary. It's a lot cheaper to see, you know, just these 4 films than, you know, a huge block of 10. There's also timing issues. It kind of makes my schedule a little easier if I'm not seeing as many movies. There typically aren't nearly as many animated features. I mean, I believe I saw all the animated features in the festival, and there was only 4, and one of them wasn't even, you know, straightforward, fully animated. There was a sequence, or there was, you know, a third of it essentially was animated, and the rest wasn't. But yeah, so that's kind of my rationale going into that. And another reason for that is just, you know, being in the industry, being someone who makes and is a fan of animation. So I just try to target it because it, you know, doesn't get the love it always deserves. But I love it, so I'm gonna go see it. Yeah, so those are the reasons for that. I didn't see Iron Giant because it's getting a wide release, so I'll be able to see it when it hits theaters. And it's I don't know, it's just good to see, you know, just to remember that animation isn't just, you know, Sony Pictures and Blue Sky and Pixar and DreamWorks and Disney. Not just those guys, but there's also stuff coming from, you know, everywhere. It's just you know, it's just good to see what's out there from other countries. And then, you know, who knows, around Oscar season I'll probably be hearing the name of some of these films again for the animated feature category. Again, the competition is not always that great because, you know, it takes so long to make these films, and like they're just, you know, not being made as much as live action. So yeah, so that was my experience at TIFF 2015. Can't wait for TIFF 2016.